Ladies and gentlemen, I am Khaled Musir, the chairman of BEBA. On behalf of BEBA, the British Egyptian Business Association, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Egypt Week, an online business mission discussion discussing the prospects and opportunities in Egyptian-British economic relations, shedding light on the gigantic leaps achieved in Egypt and focusing on Egypt's green economy. Virtual Egypt Week is organized by BEBA and the EB's annual business mission to the UK, which is being held for 5 consecutive years. However, this year, in line with the current safety guidelines, it will be taking place virtually. The whole world is at a crossroads. COVID, Brexit, demographic changes, rise of new economic superpowers, all this demands agility and fast transformation by all nations and businesses to try to adopt to the new realities. Egypt has been at the forefront of nations adopting fast and effective transformation while maintaining positive growth, quite a rarity these days. This week will contain a number of webinars and roundtable discussions. And we hope that during the virtual conference, we can give our British counterparts and the world a glimpse of the seismic transformation that Egypt is going through and how we as a nation are catching up on all fronts. Egyptian officials, as well as independent private sector views, shall be presented, and we hope we can share some of our excitement with you. I wish to thank the Egyptian government and officials who will be joining us this week, namely the Prime Minister of Egypt, His Excellency the Prime Minister of Egypt, Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources, Minister of Tourism and Antiquities, Minister of Planning and Economic Development, Minister of International Cooperation, Minister of Finance, Minister of Communication and Information Technology, Minister of Transport, Minister of Trade and Industry, His Excellency the Advisor to the President for Egypt for Healthcare, and the Deputy Minister for University Affairs. And also from the officials from the UK government. Also, I'd like to thank the business leaders, our partners, for joining us, and special thanks to the UK Ambassador to Egypt and his team, and the Department of International Trade, His Excellency the Egyptian Ambassador to the UK and his team, and of course our partners EBCC and their team. I'd also like to thank our sponsors who made this virtual event possible: Kenya, EFG Hermes, HSBC Egypt, SAP, all of whom have helped make this happen. And I wish to thank you all for your interest in Egypt. Finally, I'm honored to have in the opening session with me, Mr. Ian Gray, Chairman of the Egyptian British Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Nirav Patel, Deputy Ambassador, who will be talking to us on behalf of Sir Jeffrey Adams, UK Ambassador. His Excellency Ambassador Tariq Adil, Egyptian Ambassador to the UK, and Sir Laurie Bristow, COP26 Regional Ambassador. Thank you for being with us, and I hope this will be quite an exciting week and beneficial to all participants. Thank you.
Khaled, thank you so much. This is Ian Gray, and this annual mission of Egyptian businesses coming to the UK, it normally falls to me to welcome you here to London, and on this occasion I welcome you to the virtual space, where I think for many of us, where children have been going to school on a virtual basis, unable to attend classes, it may feel a little bit like that as we go through the week. My thanks to all of you who have tuned in to watch for this. A lot of work has gone into this, and as from the Chamber, I mean, we are extremely grateful for the cooperation, help, and all of the work that's been done by BEBA to actually marshal such a great assembly of people from Egypt, actually be here and share the message, as you say, with not just with the UK, but with the rest of the world. So it's big thanks to you and all of your team for what has happened. For those of you who are going to be watching, there's a lot of really good things coming on this week. And I think coming to a conference on a virtual basis, the one thing that you will miss is the corridor conversations, which sometimes are so important in bringing businesses together. And I would just like to put in a quick plug for the launch of the Trade Accelerator, which is now an online platform available, has been developed working with BEBA and the Chamber and some of the other organizations, business organizations in Egypt, to actually create a platform for businesses to be able to talk to each other. So you will hear more about that as the week goes on. I'd like to just hand over now for the rest of the introductions, in particular to the Egyptian ambassador in the UK, His Excellency Hala. So Tariq, over to you.
Good morning. I believe this is the start of what promises to be a very interesting week on Egypt, and I'm honored to be part of this interactive week event that will bring together Egypt's top policymakers and the private sector from both countries, and to engage in discussions on different aspects and sectors of our bilateral cooperation. This event will indeed serve as a platform to exchange views, recognize both the challenges and opportunities, and build solid bases for moving forward on issues of common interest. Unlike every year, we are meeting today virtually. Indeed, we miss having all our guests here in London who used to join BEBA's annual knock-door mission. Let me also take this opportunity to praise the excellent work conducted by the Egyptian British Chamber of Commerce and BEBA for their sincere endeavors to strengthen cooperation between Egypt and the United Kingdom over the past years. Distinguished guests, we meet today at a time of intertwined humanitarian, public health, and economic challenges, where we strive to meet these challenges by mobilizing a host of resources and delivering appropriate policies and essential stimulus packages in order to offset these challenges. In today's world, such challenges can no longer be contained within the borders of one country, and thus requires concrete collective efforts. Egypt and the United Kingdom, with their deeply rooted partnership and shared values, have managed once again to push the frontiers of collaboration in responding to the negative implications of the current pandemic crisis. On the bilateral level, the Egyptian government has granted a waiver to export of crucial PPEs for the United Kingdom NHS. The United Kingdom, on its part, is coordinating with British businesses to provide some of the immediate medical needs of Egypt, as well as supporting Egyptian efforts in fighting the coronavirus in its three dimensions: health, economic, and social aspects. On the international level, both countries, Egypt and the United Kingdom, share a position of having a vaccine that's accessible to all. Recently, Egypt and the United Kingdom have collaborated on listing the first ever Middle Eastern sovereign green bonds by Egypt on the London Stock Exchange. The listing furthers our shared ambition to work towards a green and resilient recovery from COVID-19, as well as supports climate priorities to the run-up of the United Nations Climate Change Conference that the UK is hosting next year. On trade, both sides are committed to signing Egypt-the United Kingdom Association Agreement very soon to maintain stability of bilateral trade flows with no disruption when the UK transition period ends later this year. We believe that this agreement will serve as a strong base for further trade liberalization between both countries in the near future. Distinguished guests, in Egypt over the past few years, the government has made a clear decision and commitment to implementing all required reforms to build a more resilient and inclusive economy. Today, we are proud of what has been achieved. Our economy's resilience helped to a great extent contain the initial shocks of the current pandemic crisis. The situation would have been much more difficult for Egypt if not for the implemented comprehensive reforms on fiscal, monetary, and structural spheres, making the country one of the very few countries to escape recession and grow positively in 2020. And that's according to the assessments of international institutions. Since the beginning of the crisis, the government moved early and gradually with an integrated approach to address the pandemic's impact on Egypt's health and business sectors. All relevant institutions in the government were monitoring and responding to the crisis day by day. We are adapting to changes and yet focusing on achieving sustainable development and prosperity based on solid and permanent foundations. In conclusion, I am sure that the Prime Minister, Mostafa Madbouly, and our distinguished ministers and speakers will have much more to say on economic cooperation and opportunities between Egypt and the United Kingdom. And I'm very much looking forward to the 4-day interactive discussions between our speakers and guests. So let us build on our solid grounds for common goals and values and weave together the fabric for deeper bilateral relations. Thank you.
Excellency, thank you very much for that. And I think you're reinforcing the attraction that as the UK goes forward into the change of the Brexit, the end of the Brexit transition agreement, and potentially trade with Egypt can be very important. And I think probably picking up a little bit on that, if I may now turn to the Deputy to Her Majesty's Ambassador to Egypt, Nirav Patel is joining us this morning. Nirav, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian, and good morning, distinguished guests. So Jeffrey, the ambassador in Cairo, is very sorry not to be with you this morning. He was called away at short notice to accompany a senior visit, but I'm very pleased to be in his seat. And I'm sure if you were here, he'd very much want to associate himself with the messages from His Excellency Tariq Adel. We agree with every word. We just want to say congratulations to everybody involved in putting together what's a really fantastic program, particularly to colleagues at EBCC and BEBA. It looks very positive and very promising. And it's thanks to Egypt's resilience and the policy making of its senior leadership that the trade and investment opportunities here are going so well, despite all of the challenges of COVID and everything else. We're very excited about opportunities for all of us in promoting a green and resilient recovery. And I know Sir Laurie Bristow might want to say something a bit more about that in a minute. But the final message from us is a practical one. For anybody who requires it, we have a really excellent DIT, trade and investment team in this embassy here, and they're here to help you in any way that they can going forward. So thank you very much.
Nirav, thank you for that. And as you mentioned, if we now turn to Sir Laurie, Sir Laurie is the COP26 regional ambassador to the Middle East and a number of other places. And I think in particular in looking at sort of Egypt's green economy as the title of our week's conference, and also the increased focus on environmental and social governance issues going forward. I think COP26, which I think will be in Glasgow in a year's time. It should have been starting today, if I'm right. But so Laurie, would you like to tell us what you think? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back in Cairo, even if unfortunately only virtually. As Ian mentioned, my portfolio covers the Middle East and North Africa region. It also covers the 4 countries of the former Soviet Union, Turkey, the Western Balkans, and China. Unfortunately, in current circumstances, I'm not able to visit any of those countries. So, such is life. As you mentioned, Ian, I mean, this time next year, almost to the day, the UK will be hosting the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26. I'd just like to start by echoing what Khaled said right at the beginning. We are at a crossroads in the world in so many ways. And one of those ways is around how we address the great challenge for our generation, which is climate change. So 5 years ago in Paris, again almost to the week, the world agreed to set a goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade and to make best efforts to limit that warming to 1.5 degrees. And no less important, we agreed to increase the support, particularly to developing countries and the world's poorest and most vulnerable countries, both to achieve that headline goal, but also to adapt to the effects of the warming that is already happening, that's already in the system. They're very challenging targets and we're not yet on course to achieve them. But I should mention that there is another conference just starting this morning in London, which is around green finance, chaired by Mark Carney and others, which is about unlocking the financial instruments, resources and innovation to enable us to do that. That said, though, the wind is changing. And the UK was, first of all, the first major economy to pass legislation. So the UK was the first major economy to pass legislation requiring net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And one after the other, what we're seeing is the world's major economies committing themselves to really ambitious targets. So to net zero and to the steps needed to meet that goal. So in recent weeks, the European Union, China, Japan and Korea have all made big announcements in this area. And of course, in the US, Mr. Biden has committed to take the United States back into the Paris Agreement right at the start of his presidency. Things are also changing rapidly in other ways. So some examples. In the power sector, in much of the world, it's now better economics to build and operate wind and solar generating capacity than to operate existing coal-powered stations. In the UK, if you're buying a new car this week, it's already cheaper to run an electric car than a petrol or diesel one. In a few years, it'll be cheaper both to buy and run an electric car than petrol or diesel. And we're planning some ambitious announcements fairly soon on phasing out the sale of petrol and diesel cars altogether. The point here, though, is that manufacturers and consumers, as well as government officials and ministers, are drawing the appropriate conclusions. So they're changing their product lines, their buying behavior, as well as the underlying regulations. So what's happening is that innovation and economies of scale are changing the economic incentives around how economic actors behave. Meanwhile, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic means that we're all more focused on the need to address big systemic risks to our health, our prosperity, and to our national security. But this is my key point for this morning. Meeting the challenge of climate change is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to create the businesses and the prosperity of the 21st century through innovation and through building new partnerships. So tackling climate change depends on governments, but it also depends on the private sector, on cities and on private citizens. So I'm grateful to the British Egyptian Business Association and the Egyptian British Chamber of Commerce and the two embassies and their ambassadors for the opportunity just to say a few words at the start of this conference on how we can work together to seize the opportunity that that represents. So just a couple of examples on what Egypt is doing. So Egypt's progress on renewable energy is extraordinarily impressive. You're home to one of the world's largest solar parks, the Benban, supported by UK Export Finance. Egypt has already exceeded its target of 20% renewable energy by 2022, and it's aiming for up to 50% by 2035. This is good economics for the future of Egypt. Second point, it's already been mentioned, in October 2020, Egypt issued $750 million worth of 5-year green bonds. Great for us, Egypt chose to make that listing on the London Stock Exchange with HSBC acting as the structuring bank. It's the first sovereign issuance in the MENA region that's listed internationally. What the bonds will do is to finance environmentally friendly, economically attractive green projects, including in green transportation, renewable energy, energy efficiency, pollution control and reduction, climate change adaptation, and the sustainable management of water and sanitation. So to conclude, what does all that mean? These innovations are good. They're good for the environment, they're good for people, they're good for business, and they're good for Egypt and the UK. Thank you.
So Laurie, thank you very much indeed. I think as we've seen sort of world energy creation move towards more renewables, we've seen solar and wind becoming more important. Africa generally has the opportunity of having lots of sunshine and actually a lot of wind, and Egypt is part of Africa in this regard. So I think the opportunities that will emerge in Egypt and the opportunities for Egypt in the new world as we go forward are great, which is part of the reason for us doing this event today. We're now actually going to be joined by the Prime Minister of Egypt, His Excellency Dr. Mostafa Madbouly, to say a few words, and after that we will be going on to the first main session, which is looking at Egypt's path towards sustainable growth, where we're going to be joined by Dr. Hala El-Sayed. So, if I may, Karim is just muted again. If we may, I think the Prime Minister has a message that he is wanting to share with us. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be with you today and participate in this important event. I would like to thank the British Egyptian Business Association, the Egyptian British Chamber of Commerce, and the effort exerted by all parties for organizing this vital event, which aims at fostering partnership and cooperation between the Egyptian and British companies for the mutual benefits of our two countries. As you may all know, Egypt and the UK have a long-standing strategic relationship. Last January, on the sideline of UK-Africa Investment Summit, His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson agreed to intensify our economic partnership to support Egypt in developing a sustainable economy that would benefit future generations. They also discussed Egypt-UK cooperation in education, in addition to the required reforms to promote Egypt's private sector and bolster its economic growth. They agreed to build on this in the coming years. We believe that after Brexit, UK will have to capitalize on Egypt's location as a center for trade and gateway to Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa has become one of the most important destinations for international business and financial institutions. Therefore, it is our vision that our cooperation in Africa should be based on the following pillars. First, intensifying the implementation of projects and developing infrastructure in order to achieve continental integration. Second, activating all the executive stages of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement in a way that contributes to enhancing the intra-regional trade. Third, enhancing the national efforts of African countries through the important role of the private sector to achieve development. Fourth, empowering youth and women. Fifth, enabling and consolidating small and medium enterprises in international business through tailored activity based on the creation of regional and global values. Currently, Egypt and UK face challenges such as post-Brexit era, the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the growing regional challenges. In this context, I would like to highlight Egypt's Vision 2030 as a cornerstone to achieve our sustainable development objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, the Egyptian government is looking forward to benefit from the promising sectors which are in line with the state's development priorities, taking into consideration the repercussions of COVID-19. These sectors include health, education, agriculture, manufacturing, communications and information technologies, and digital transformation. Certainly, the Egyptian ministries participating in the coming sessions will outline the latest developments in these areas. Ladies and gentlemen, we are keen to build strong partnerships with the United Kingdom. This required us to agree on an integrated package and action plan to implement projects. I know there will be business meetings throughout the course of this event, and I would like to encourage companies in both sides to make constructive deals. I am confident that the Egyptian and British business communities are currently more eager than ever for building stronger economic ties to benefit our two countries. Thank you very much and wish you all the success and progress.
On behalf of all of us, I'm sure we're extremely grateful. I am extremely grateful for the Prime Minister to find the time to be able to create a message for us. I think it underlines the importance of this event for the businesses in both countries. I think that now brings us, and I think it's a great opportunity to introduce Her Excellency Dr. Hala El-Sayed, who is the Minister of Planning and Economic Development. And we will now be going into the session, which is headlined and has the title of Egypt's Path Towards Sustainable Growth. And we will get an overview from the Minister. If I may just say that there will be another session with the Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources coming along a little later this morning. So for those of you who are staying for this session in this conference room, we will also be joined on the panel by Dr. Ziad Bayeldin, who is the Managing Partner of Bayeldin Law Office and is a former Deputy Prime Minister in Egypt. We'll be joined by Karim Awad, who is the Group CEO of EFG Hermes Holdings, and we're also joined by Ahmed Mekki, who is the Chairman and CEO of the Kenya Group. We will be having a panel discussion and things, but we will, first of all, we'll kick off with Dr. Hala El-Sayed. And I do understand, Minister, I've been told that you are a little tight on time, so we're grateful to you for finding the time to come and join us. We hope we look forward to listening to you and for you to be able to stay at least for a few questions, perhaps after you finish speaking. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. Gray, Chairman of the Egyptian-British Chamber of Commerce, and of course for the Chairman of the British-Egyptian Business Association, Mr. Nasser, for extending this invitation to participate and speak in this very important event. Of course, all my greetings extended to all my dear valuable participants and business leaders. I understand my intervention is on Egypt's path towards sustainable development from vision to implementation.
We can still hear you.
You hear me? Hello?
We hear you well, yes, thank you.
Yes. I understand my intervention is on Egypt's path towards sustainable development from vision to implementation. So let me walk you through the Sustainable Development Plan for Egypt from the strategy throughout the policies to the implementation. And let me start by saying that Egypt was one of the pioneer countries that adopted a Sustainable Development Strategy 2030. And this Sustainable Development Strategy 2030 represented the national version of the Agenda 2030, the SDGs 2030. And what are the main fundamentals of this strategy in terms of sustainability? First, this strategy, when it started, it tackled the three main pillars of development. We tackled the economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Not only this, but these three pillars of development were interrelated and interconnected. So we cannot adopt the economic policies and ignore the social dimension of it, or ignore the environmental. So these were the three pillars of the strategy, were interconnected and interrelated, and they had to go hand in hand. What also ensures the sustainability of this strategy is that it was done through a great participatory approach. It is not the government strategy, nor the private sector, nor the civil society, but basically it was a people strategy. A wide range of participation, public dialogue was done through different segments of the population, including a wide representation of young people and of women too. After that, we started by end of 2016, Egypt embarked on an economic reform program. This reform program was basically to address significant structural deficiencies that the economy was suffering from. The economic reform program entailed implementation of a wide range of reforms, including disciplining both the fiscal and the monetary policies, restructuring some sector, most notably the energy sector, liberalizing the exchange rate, improving the investment climate, and with all the aim to increase competitiveness and restore investors' confidence in the Egyptian economy. At the heart of this economic reform program were several legislative and institutional reforms contributing to more conducive business environment, and these include, not limited to, the new investment law, a new industrial licensing act, a bankruptcy and exit mechanism act, a new SME law that helps to integrate the informal sector. All these legislative reforms were at the heart of the economic reform program. Aside to this, we also substantially invested in infrastructure in order to enhance the competitiveness of our economy. In addition to that, we invested a lot in human capital, and there was a turnaround plan in human capital, specifically in education. So this was at the core of our reform plan program. All these measures provided us with a significant fiscal space and with resilience to face external shocks. And accordingly, Egypt achieved a consistent economic growth, reaching a 5.6% growth by the end of 2019. End of December 2019, we reached a consistent economic growth, reaching 5.6%, and a consistent decline in unemployment rate, reaching 7.5% by the end of last year. As of course we all know, in 2020 the world faced an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. This crisis posed major challenges in all economies, whether they are developed or developing economies, and for the first time we faced a complete lockdown to most of the sectors of the economy. In order to deal with the pandemic, our strategy also was a sustainable strategy. It centered on the need to maintain a balance between ensuring people's health, which is top priority, and sustaining economic activity. And actually, this was a difficult challenge, but it was a doable one. The Egyptian government adopted a proactive strategy very early on, tackling all necessary measures to mitigate the negative impact of the crisis on most of the vulnerable segments of the population. Our key objective relied on a different dimension. First is to contain the spread of the virus without imposing a full lockdown. To support the economic activity through giving some support to some specific sectors, monitoring developments regarding the crisis and updating all the forecasts accordingly, postponing all dues and credit entitlements to some of the sectors that suffered the most, like the tourism sector and the SME sector. We also supported the irregular workers. They were central to our strategy. Hence, a cash disbursement, a cash grant was disbursed to this segment. And in addition to that, also we created a database for these workers to enable them now to classify them, enable them to provide them with proper training and with proper and decent jobs. These measures were critical. It enabled Egypt to be one of the very few growing economies in the midst of the crisis. And according to a recent IMF revision projections for Egypt, which raised its growth to 3.5%. The growth rate for 2019-2020 reached almost 3.6%. And of course, with the government interventions, because without the government interventions, we would have reached less than that. The post-COVID era, of course, necessitates rearrangement of our, not only our priorities, but the world priorities. Triggering an increased focus on specific sectors and specific activities, such as the health sector, digitalization, infrastructure, agriculture, manufacturing, and of course, the importance of the green economy and reopening and rebooting green. Hence, the key elements of our sustainability strategy was to increase investments, our public investments in health sector, this plan for about 45%, by tackling also major issues such as increase in number of ICU beds, number of childcare beds, automation of the health records in most of the hospitals, also an increase in the investment in the infrastructure and digitalization sector. We increased investment by 300% in order to create the technological and information ecosystem for the automation of the government services. And of course, as we always say, crisis face challenges, we face challenges, but it provides us with good opportunities. So it helped us to accelerate our efforts in digitalization and in government services. A great emphasis also is being done on the localization of manufacturing activities of key industries like pharmaceuticals, further expansion in construction of industrial zones, supporting the development of supply chains in order to hedge against any disruptions that we have met. Aligning with this is the green economy principles in the investment projects, international investment projects. We reached this year around 30% of our projects that abide by the green economy principles. We target to reach about 100% over the next 3 years. We coordinated with the Ministry of Environment to introduce the environmental guide for public investment projects for all public investments to adhere to sound environmental codes. This has been approved a week ago by the cabinet. They approved these codes. Of course, it is not limited to maximizing the benefits from all unconventional water resources, waste management, and increased reliance on smart transportation, as well as renewable energy. Of course, as you know, we have launched recently the green bonds, which indicates the Egyptian government's keenness to prioritize sustainable finance. These bonds will be used to finance mainly clean transportation and water and waste management products, and of course renewable energy products. all these efforts would not be sustainable if we did not continue the economic reform program and move to the reform of the real economy. As you know, the economic reform program that we started in November 2016 tackled mainly the monetary and the fiscal side of the economy. The government has been working for the past few months or a year almost to work on structural reform measures for the real economy, and that's what we call the second phase of the reform program. It implements structural reforms targeting the real economy, constructive structural reforms in order to make sure that what we achieved is sustainable. It includes create new job opportunities and diversify production patterns and improve the business climate, enhance, of course, the competitiveness of Egypt's exports in order to achieve sustainable and inclusive economic development. The main pillars of this program are diversifying the production structure of the Egyptian economy, moving more towards industry, agriculture, digitalization, enhancing the role of the private sector, and promoting the flexibility of the labor market through advanced technical education and training. In addition to the amendments that the government has passed a few months ago on the new private-public partnership law, Egypt established its first sovereign fund, acting as one of the most reliable mechanisms for creating more effective public-private partnership opportunities for projects that bring about mutual benefits and interest and contributes to sustainable development. We aim to raise value across the board and increase joint investment with the private sector, whether this private sector is local, regional, or international. The role of the fund lies in attracting private investments in the country's underutilized or unutilized assets in order to unleash the country's vast potential and create long-term value for our future generation. The Sovereign Fund of Egypt aims to monetize and unlock value from the country's immense and rich resources, most notably its geographical features, its heritage, and of course its different diversified talents. Aligning with the reprioritizing the country's strategy, we established 4 funds aligning with the government's prioritization of its sectors. We have established a health service and pharmaceutical fund, a financial service and digitalization fund, infrastructure and utilities fund, in addition to real estate and tourism and heritage fund. These sub-funds are preparing for, as I said, aligning with the state's priorities for the upcoming period and supporting the private sector to work with the fund in a more flexible manner. The fund recently also collaborated with the General Authority for the Suez Canal, as well as a consortium from the private sector in order to localize one of the main manufacturers in Egypt, most notably the railway cars, satisfying Egypt's needs and providing vast opportunities for exporting, most notably to African countries. The fund has also signed different protocols and MOUs with international companies such as the London-based Actus to enhance investments in energy and infrastructure sectors. And of course, we are open to more collaboration and partnership with different private enterprises, whether on the national or on the international levels. Finally, I'd just like to reiterate our commitment to work with our partners, with the private sector. And I would like to say that all efforts to increase the involvement of the private sector in the development process aim at enhancing the sustainability and ensuring that that's an inclusive strategy. As I said at the beginning, the strategy was not a government strategy, nor a private sector. It is a people strategy. We aim to work hand in hand with everybody. As you know, sustainability is about the balance, to strike the balance between satisfying all the current needs without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. Thank you for listening, and I'll be very happy to receive any interventions.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. I think it's interesting in that, you know, looking at the country from the outside, sort of, it feels like a shift from very much government-led spending into a much bigger interest in the private sector. And over this last weekend in the UK, there has been a lot of criticism of the UK government at not being very good at listening to business. So, you know, for the benefit of the UK audience, how does the Egyptian government listen to business?
Well, thank you very much, Ian. First, as I said, this strategy, when putting the strategy, which was a long-term strategy, it was participatory approach. We had public dialogues. The private sector was leading actually the public dialogues, civil society, academia, media, parliamentarians. We had a wide range of participation, and we also outsourced this public dialogue in the context that I asked, for example, Cairo University to hold different public dialogues and give me the feedback on different segments of the development of the social reform programs that we do. The youth, we have a group of youth that are aligned to the ministry. They are called Egypt Youth 2030. They are a group of volunteers, and I'm very proud of them. They join forces, they come to the ministry, we give them the space, we give them experts from the ministry and from the institutes and from our think tanks to sit with and discuss different ideas. All these ideas help, you know, not only because we are at very unprecedented times, but generally you need to talk and listen to different segments of society in order to build ideas. Dr. Ziad was, I'm happy he's joining with us with the panel. He was heading a group of experts, and they are helping us to give us ideas on the structural reform issues on different sectors of the society, because this is, you cannot think on your own and you cannot implement things, because at the end, it's people that are facing all the policies, so you need to work hand in hand. We have also a very nice initiative that maybe I didn't talk about, which is as you know, Egypt is a huge country. We are about over 100 million people. Different governorates face different challenges and have different developmental gaps. So the president initiated what we call a decent life for citizens, Haya Karima initiative. This Haya Karima initiative, it involves the government, the civil society are working hand in hand on the governorate level to help on putting and closing the gap in different developmental gaps in different governorates, the private sector, through the CSR, the banks. We are working hand in hand through this initiative to work in different governorates and different rural areas. This year, for example, the government allocated about 9 billion Egyptian pounds in order for only for these about 300 rural areas, in addition to what the private sector is helping in schools, building schools, in providing sanitation, in providing some medical units to help in helping upgrading the level of women and ladies in order to provide decent jobs for ladies in order to make this sustainable. These type of initiatives ensure sustainability because the people themselves see the change. They do the change themselves and they are part of the change. So we do a lot of public dialogues, whether on the government level, as I say, we outsource this public dialogues and we tell people to give us the feedback. His Excellency, the Prime Minister, did different public dialogues in order to discuss with different business people. When it was the pandemic, His Excellency, the President, asked us to run different public dialogues, and we did different to get the feedback of people from different segments of the society. So engagement, it's continuous engagement, continuous listening. And I think, of course, definitely people in the government, sometimes they face challenges that people outside the government do not realize. But sometimes when you have a clear vision and you are thinking clearly with no interruption of the challenges, you give clear insights and clear roadmaps.
Thank you for that. There is one very specific, very narrow question which has actually come up from those listening in. It's from David Butter of Chatham House. He's asking, and this may not be one for you. You may point us to someone else. But it was actually, it looks as though in Q4 of your fiscal years 19 and 20, in Q4 there was a big jump in consumer spending. Is that something that the government had noticed? That something? Is there any reason for it that you're aware of, or should we talk perhaps the finance ministry or something?
No. What you said, that there is an increase in government spending?
No, not in government spending. In consumer spending, it looks as though private consumption's gone up over 10% to 11.3%, according to David Butter, in Q4. Is it an anomaly, or is it driven by any characteristic?
Yes. No, let me tell you that there was a decrease in consumer spending previous to that. And the government did a few things. First, there was an increase in all payrolls last year. We increased all salaries by, first we increased the minimum wage last year. A year ago, we increased the minimum wage. So everybody had an increase in the minimum wage level. The other thing, there was an increase in the allowance because consumption is a major force of growth. So we started noticing 2 years previous to that the consumption trigger in the sources of growth was decreasing. So we thought that we need an enhancement in consumption. So we raised the minimum consumption level. We increased, of course, Ministry of Finance, the government took the decision to increase the allowance, the yearly allowance, by about 15% instead of the 7%. In addition to this year, we increased the pension. So there was a major increase in the consumer spending, and this was meant because we knew that the consumer spending was going down for the previous 2 years because of the inflation, because of the economic reform. Inflation was high, so consumption was going down. So we made sure that we move consumption back to its higher level in order to reciprocate for any decrease that happens in investment. And it was good because in these times, consumption was greatly needed in order to maintain the growth levels that we want.
We did ask the right person, and that was a very clear answer. So thank you very much. If I may, I'd now like to turn to Ziad Because yeah, one of the advantages in talking to someone who's a lawyer, forgive me if I say, you know, the words lawyers and, you know, can we avoid them seem to sit in the same sentence. But I think you're sitting in a position to get a good view across many industries and what's happening. And clearly the government policy must be seeking more foreign direct investment coming in terms of looking at the sustainable future. I mean, do you have any observations that you'd like to share with us on what you see going on at the minute, in particular for sort of a UK audience looking at Egypt? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I hope you can hear me well.
We hear you fine, absolutely.
Okay, great, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted this event is taking place as it always does, in spite of the conditions. I think everyone has done a magnificent job putting this very distinguished group of speakers and of audience together. And I'm really delighted to hear that you know, the presentation given by Her Excellency, Dr. Hala Said, is, as always, very comprehensive and very transparent in what the government has done and what it intends to do in the future. I think investment really is the key here. So sustainable development cannot be isolated from sustainable investment. And there is no doubt in my mind that the future is all about investment, and particularly about encouraging private sector investment to play a bigger role in the Egyptian economy going forward. I was very pleased to see and to hear, both in the opening remarks by His Excellency the Prime Minister, that emphasis on investment, as well as in the presentation by Dr. Hala Said. What I can perhaps add a little bit as a lawyer and a little bit as someone who's been involved in the policy framework for a few years of my life, I can only add perhaps that the dialogue that you asked about, and that Her Excellency Dr. Hala responded by saying that it has been there and it is true, and I was very honored to be part of that dialogue in the past. That dialogue needs to go further in a post-COVID situation. Are we in a post-COVID world? We're not yet, but we have to think of the post-COVID world. And now is the time to think of the post-COVID world. And I think there is really a big need now to restart that kind of dialogue between government and private sector in order to try to shape up the priorities of investments and how to bring investment, private sector investment back. I can only offer perhaps 3 ideas on my side, which I suggest can be a good basis for dialogue between government and private sector. The first one is not with respect to new legislation. Dr. Hala Said has mentioned a number of extremely important laws that have been issued in the last 5 years. She mentioned the industrial licensing law, the bankruptcy law, the SME investment law. So we have had quite the banking law most recently. So we've had quite an impressive array of basic legislation issued from Parliament in the last 5 years. We continue to have the gap between law and implementation. And it's not today's problem. It has been a problem for a long time, including when I was in government and when I was in the investment authority. But it's a good opportunity now to take stock of those laws and to conduct a dialogue between the government and the private sector about how those laws can be implemented now that they are out. Because so far, their impact has not been greatly felt on the day-to-day business. The other line of discussion that I hope takes place is on taxation. And I don't mean on tax itself, but rather on the cost of doing business. The truth is that in Egypt, even until today, even with all the additional spending that has had to be made with COVID, we continue, I think, to have a relatively, frankly, I won't say low, but I would say not high rate of taxation on the whole. The additional burden comes from additional levies, payments, things that have to be, completed. So it's that kind of unexpected cost that I think we need to discuss openly with the private sector in order to give the private sector a sense of predictability of cost of doing business going forward. And the third and last point I would offer as a subject of discussion and dialogue is the future role of the state in the economy. This is a big subject. It is not one that can be resolved easily. And let me, by the way, stress that I'm not an advocate of the disappearance of the state from playing an economic role. It's not my position, has never been my position, and is not today. Where I think we can do better is in defining the lines, in defining the roles. Again, the entry point being predictability. I think if there is some understanding between the private sector and the government, what are the areas where the government intends to continue to be active and intends to continue to be an investor and a driver of those sectors, and which are the areas where the privates will be competing with itself rather than with the government. I offer those three ideas for future dialogue, and I think they would go a long way in shaping what I hope will be a very successful post-COVID investment climate in Egypt.
Ziad, thank you for that. Thank you for the constructive suggestion. I'm sure the minister was listening carefully. Now, as always happens, as you've been in government, whether the government actually can take things on board and do things, as the minister already has said, sometimes there are challenges that make it extremely difficult. I think what I'd like to do, in picking up from your points there, if I could go to Karim Awad, who's CEO of EFG Hermes. Karim, I mean, clearly you operate in, I think, is it 12 or 13 countries now? But you know, what's your view of Egypt, and are you positive about Egypt going forward?
Thank you, Ian, for having me. It's a bit unfair for me to go after two very eloquent speakers, whether it's Her Excellency or Dr. Ziad, so I'll try to do my best here. So I think, as you correctly pointed out, we're currently operating in 12 countries, but Egypt remains our core focus market. Her Excellency discussed at the beginning of during her speech that about the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Egypt, and we are one of the local parties that is partnering up with the Sovereign Wealth Fund on hopefully what will be an acquisition of a small bank and turning it around following that acquisition. We remain very bullish on the country. You know, naturally we are biased, given that even though we're in 12 or 13 countries today, we are Egyptians in our core, but we also believe that fundamentally the country remains quite attractive. It's a very large population base. Some view it as one of its curses. We view it as one of its blessings, because it does provide a very large market that remains untapped for many products and services. We believe as an organization in financial inclusion, and we believe that we will play an important role in our business development strategy going forward. We own already a microfinance house that is servicing over 330,000 small and medium enterprises in the country, and we believe that the bank is going to be hopefully another step in helping the government's strategy for financial inclusion going forward. So we remain very, very bullish about the country going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. And in terms of the talk about sustainable growth, is that something, I mean, there is, I mean, the buzzwords around now is all around ESG, and, you know, whether it's, does that affect your decisions on investment going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. We are, as an organization, a UNPRI signatory, and we have adopted ESG into all of our investment policies. We believe in strong governance. We believe in making sure of the environmental impact of our investments. We are a very large investor in renewable energy projects, in education, and especially the K-12 segments here in Egypt. And we believe also in the corporate social responsibility and in the role that the organization needs to play in developing the livelihood of the different stakeholders that we operate with. And you'd be very surprised, we are a publicly listed company. I think 4 or 5 years ago, no one ever used to ask us about from our investor base about our ESG policy. But today it's a topic that comes up very often in every discussion. It is something that all funds, global funds, are looking for, and it's taking a lot more prominence in our business model and the way we do things.
Thank you for that. I think it's sitting in the UK. I think sometimes there's an assumption that Egypt might not be thinking about these things. So thank you for highlighting that. If I can turn that to Ahmed Mekki, because I mean, following on, the minister was saying that there would be an interest in increasing private sector. The Prime Minister talked about the need for digitization and also in building infrastructure. And it seems to me that in Benya, you have a business that is ticking the boxes in both digitization and infrastructure. I understand you're also developing from Egypt trade into Africa. Is that right, Ahmed? No, you're still muted.
Yes. Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Ian, and good morning, everyone. And first, I would like to thank BEBA for conducting this event. Despite of all the challenges, it's in a virtual version this year, and we hope a great success and constructive event with a distinguished bouquet of speakers representing the government officials and businessmen. So talking about what we do in the infrastructure and the development in Egypt and Africa, I will take from what His Excellency, the Prime Minister, and Her Excellency, Dr. Hala mentioned about the cooperation with the private sector and the enhancing the role of the private sector in the development and in the digital transformation. This is maybe one of the specific areas that we are focusing on. So one of the investment that we started earlier this year is to build the biggest manufacturing facility for fiber optic. It's in the economic zone of Suez Canal, and it will start the first production next year, inshallah. And this is mainly to serve not only the Egyptian need for which is as a very important component, it's a cornerstone for the ICT infrastructure, which the ICT infrastructure is the enabler and the catalyst for digital transformation, which is the name of the era. I think we all agree that this era is a digital transformation era. And with COVID-19, it's fast forwarded any agenda for digital transformation for any country. So Egypt already many years ago, let's talk about starting from 2016, the reforming program and announcing the Egypt Vision 2030 for the sustainability. The transformation of the digital transformation is a very important component for this. It's a catalyst for the development of any sector as well. And the government showed great commitment to mega projects in ICT infrastructure. We were honored to be awarded some of these projects, important projects. For example, in the education sector, transforming and making all the ICT infrastructure for 2,530 schools nationwide. This was all before COVID-19. And I think this is a global record that we have in last year. Near to 1 million students, they were having their certification online concurrently. This was a great test for such an infrastructure and a very profound position that the government is already taking and starting by one important sector like the education. There are other sectors as well. For example, the digital transformation of the public enterprises, which we are currently doing this project, transforming more than 60 public enterprise companies digitally with ERP system for them. Also in the higher education, there are many sectors, and Egypt for us is definitely the right geography to start from. And that's why we made this investment in the fiber optic factory. with the need for the de-globalization and the critical industries like fiber optic. So since we announced this, we received a lot of great interest from more than 8 countries from Africa, who is a sort of an offtake or to book more than half of the capacity of our annual production of this fiber optic. We go best practice. We partner with the global leader, Corning, and our national partner is AOI, the Arab Organization of Industrialization. And this is one good example for investing in Africa and with a technology like this to address an important industry.
Thank you very much. If I may, I'm going to come to you in a moment again, Ziad, but if you can ask Ahmed one last question. You're Egyptian, you're based in Egypt, you're talking about how good it is. If you were a UK company, why would you look at Egypt to do anything?
Okay. If I'm a UK company, I think looking at Egypt and partnering with Egyptian companies, which I definitely encourage. Why? Because Egypt is having a lot of good calibers that can help a lot when they partner together between the United Kingdom companies and the Egyptian companies to address such a great opportunities, not only in Egypt, I'm talking all over Africa, considering Egypt is the right place to address such transformation for Africa. Africa also is moving to a digital Africa. We already took some good steps on that. One good example also is DRC. We're making a big transformation project in infrastructure, ICT infrastructure, fiber optic nationwide, in a big country like DRC, very central. We partner with British companies on this. Best practice for us is important. In our culture and what can help us to address all of these opportunities, there are 2 things that we don't have the luxury for. We don't have the luxury of moving slow. We have to move very fast. And we don't have the luxury as well of making mistakes to then fix it. We have to do it right from the first time. So best practice, and with technology companies in UK with great track record and best practice, definitely with the collaboration with Egypt, calibers in Egypt, access from Egypt, I think together we can do a great thing.
Okay, thank you for that. I also know Dr. Hala has to be heading off. The message has to head off to another meeting. So I think on behalf of all of us, we'd like to express our thanks to her for being able to be with us this morning. And Ziad, if I may, in coming to you with a very similar sort of question, I mean, people in the UK are looking and think, well, this might be interesting. You've given some constructive input to the Egyptian government on things it can do to make things better. What would you be saying to British companies as to why they should be considering doing more with Egypt?
Well, I would say that really we've all learned a great deal in the last year or so. And we continue to learn and we continue to adapt. And I think that Egypt has done remarkably well with its resources, with its state of the economy, with its obligations in the kind of public spending it needs to do. I think we've done remarkably well in managing the health situation on the one hand so far, and quite frankly, the economic aspect as well. The debate about health versus economy is one that has shaped and transformed the whole world, not least the USA. But we've all had that to engage with that question. And I think that in Egypt, we have made, the government has made some tough choices, but ones that were necessary and actually turned out to be quite right in ensuring that right balance between health and economy. All of this tells me a lot about what we have learned, how we are preparing for the future. And I would tell our British friends and partners, this is a time to engage. This is a time to find out. This is a time to come and say, this is what we'd like to see in Egypt if you want us to grow our investments. I think, you know, their point of view has to be quite well communicated to the government. And I'm sure that with discussion and perseverance and making sure this dialogue takes place, I think the country is ready to adapt to a great deal in a post-COVID world, as I said. So engage, talk, engage, communicate, make sure your expectations and requests are being heard.
Thank you for that. And obviously, I mentioned in my introduction that those who want to engage with people in Egypt, there's this thing called the Trade Accelerator, which is now available. It's not quite a LinkedIn, it's not a Facebook, it's a very narrow focus between the UK and Egypt, where you will find like-minded people and businesses. Now, I'm going to come to Karim next, but we are open to questions from all of those who are listening in. So there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the page. So if you want to put questions, then please use the Q&A button on that. Karim, I think of you as an investment house. Probably, you know, you do a number of different things. But can you, I mean, do you find sort of dealing with London easy, or is this something where, as an Egyptian business, you struggle to deal with potential partners in the London market?
Not at all. I think you know, there has been always a great relationship between London and Cairo when it comes to the investment environment. The UK is a very big foreign direct investor in the country, especially when it comes to the oil and gas sector, the telecom sector, as I'm sure you are well aware of, Ian. And you know, there are also some dual listings that take place between the Egyptian Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange. So in general, we have seen a lot of good cooperation. Naturally, we would like to see more going forward, as Dr. Ziad pointed out. We have done a lot of work as a country over the past 3 or 4 years in making the investment climate much better, and we hope that this starts to translate into more FDIs that come not just from the UK but from different places all over the world.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, Ahmed, in the post-COVID world, do you see any significant changes, or it seems to me that Egypt has sort of rolled through the challenge of COVID. Some people have been talking about the balance between the economic and the health thing being managed. And it seems to me that in Egypt, the government has been very realistic about what a government can do and what a government can't do. But do you see any significant changes for your business as we go forward?
Yeah, I think definitely there will be changes, and I think we all started to recognize a sort of a new normal that will be after COVID or post-COVID-19. We're now maybe on the second wave of it, but I think we all, between work from home, learn from home, shop from home, and so I think we discovered a lot of things that maybe we were not practicing, although technology was there, but we were not practicing it enough. I think it will be part of our normal life. So definitely I will relate this again to the infrastructure. To be able to address all of this, definitely the infrastructure is a very important component in this. We still need to invest and invest and invest in infrastructure. So this will attract a lot of investments and billions of dollars in the coming years. Egypt already invested in the last 3-4 years, but will continue to invest on that. FDIs, I'm sure, will be interested to invest more on with having the right environment, which is already Egypt is providing that. Sovereign Wealth Fund, as Her Excellency mentioned, is definitely a great step. We're currently in discussions and talks with them. Hopefully, we'll address 1 or 2 opportunities in the near future. So in brief, the change, I think all the indications of the change, I think we knew now many of them, and we are prepared for that. And by investing more in infrastructure, definitely there is learning that we have been through during 2020. This will help us a lot in smart investment, in smart infrastructure. There are many areas that will consider the infrastructure sharing. So investing in infrastructure is important, but now taking it to another step, sharing infrastructure and having a sort of, beside the shared economy, sharing the infrastructure as well, passive and active.
Okay, thank you. Each of you knows me well enough to know that sort of that there is a serious risk of me asking questions that we shouldn't really be asking out loud in a public place. But that won't stop me. So I think we're running sort of a little short on time. I think there's probably time for one more question. So it's the same question, but I'll come to all three of you in turn to the answer. So what's the impact in Egypt of the American elections? There we are. So shall we start with the ex-politician Ziad? And do you see, will things change?
Well, I think we all got very involved in these elections. You know, friends of mine were not sleeping for the last 3 days, frankly, excessively so. So it's been quite an exciting couple of weeks. And by the way, we have our own elections going on now, and they deserve some attention as well. So parliamentary elections, that is. No, I mean, seriously, I think Egypt will be impacted in as much as the world will be impacted. I think there is an exaggeration of looking at the personality change over the relationship between the US and Egypt. I think there will be a change, certainly, but it is one that will impact the world, and Egypt is part of that world. So I see it more as an impact coming from a global change. But I don't worry at all about, not at all, I don't worry, to be perfectly honest, I don't worry about the comparison between the US foreign policy 10 years ago and what it will be now. I think things have changed. Everybody has moved on. You know, contenders for political power in 10 years ago, I mean by that the Muslim Brotherhood, are not contenders anymore. They're not accepted in Egypt at all by the people, let alone by the government. So I don't think we should over-exaggerate that worry. I cannot hide that on a very personal level. I'm happier with this result than otherwise, because I think the world needs a change towards more openness, you know, discourse that is much more in favor of trade, of investment, of exchange, of, you know, that kind of discourse is what the world needs in a post-COVID world. So to summarize, I'm not pessimistic at all. I have no worries about that aspect. And I think Egypt will be impacted, as I said, by virtue of being part of the world, much more than on a narrow bilateral level.
And very sensible. Now, Ahmed was actually visible on the screen until just as you were finishing, Ziad. Ahmed turned his video off. No, you can't hide that way, Ahmed.
No, but I'm not a politician. I'm not a politician, so.
Okay. Kareem, yes, we're coming to you. Any difference from an EFG perspective?
No, I'll actually go ahead with Ahmed's point of view that I'm not a politician as well. So we'll leave it to Dr. Ziad to summarize our collective views, I guess.
I feel I should retract my observations since nobody else is answering.
No, look, I think we're all into something where, you know, the world is going to change a bit, and none of us quite know exactly what it's going to be. So look, gentlemen, look, it was thanks to Dr. Hala al-Said as Minister for kicking off this session. I'm conscious that I meant to finish in time. People will not be going out of the room, mixing in the corridors and having a free cup of coffee. I'm afraid all of you who want a quick break before the next session will have to go and get your own cups of coffee at home or wherever you're watching from. But Ziad, Ahmed, Karim, look, thank you all very much. I found your contributions today really valuable, and I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone else who's been listening in this section. Thank you again very much. And
thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.